Hi there, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawwalker, your host, and today we're going to be checking out this new album from Jack White, Fear of the Dawn. This is the first of two albums that Jack White has slated for release this year, with the second release, Entering Heaven Alive, coming out July 22nd. Over the past few years, it seems like Jack White has been pretty busy with Third Man Records, working with a lot of notable bands like Sleep and Boris. White also seems to be pretty hell-bent on getting record production kicked back into high gear in the United States, which is a mission that I find incredibly admirable. So for this year to be so busy with musical releases for Jack White is pretty cool to see. The way that Jack seems to be ever present in the current musical zeitgeist is very impressive. It really puts off this image of being like one of the busiest musicians out there. And I was actually a little bit worried about these releases because of how Jack White seemingly spreads himself so thin, but I guess during the past couple of years of quarantine and lockdowns, he did have some time to write a lot of these tracks, because it seems like they're really going for a single track for almost every track on this album. I mean, the production work on almost all of these tracks sounds like he's geared pretty much each and every one of these songs so that they really could have been single material. It's actually really surprising compared to what I was anticipating. Jack White's last record, Boarding House Reach, didn't really grab me in a lasting way, and while I feel like this new album as a whole I'm going to have a very similar relationship with in the long run, I can confidently say that at least some of these songs are really going to be sticking with me for a while. The first song, Taking Me Back, really shows off this blisteringly fuzz-heavy, almost punk rock sound. White's vocals are at their most blunt form, and the really excellent groove that this song works with is very finely works through all of these crazy weird noise effects that are pretty much all over this song and all over this record, really. At some parts it's kind of hard to tell if the guitar is what's being modulated so heavily or if it's like a synthesizer. It's a really great opening song for the album and is pretty much a tone setter for this album. Like, thematically they really are very focused on this sound for almost the entirety of the record. Taking Me Back leads right into the title track, Fear of the Dawn, which feels like a breakdown of the first song. Jack White's vocals on this song almost reach for some like 80s heavy metal at points, and I mean, it sounds like it's channeling like Dio era Sabbath and dousing it in like an ocean of fuzz. This is a really cool track. The White Raven takes that fuzz and amps it up even further to the point that the signal from what sounds like a bass is affected so heavily that I can't really think of any other recordings that I've heard of that sound like this. It's just a really unique sound that just rips. Heidi Ho is really the first song on the album that kind of starts to lose me a bit, and while I can't say I love this track, I do at the very least kind of get what they were going for here, and I do appreciate the experimentation on this song. It's kind of like Jack White is trying to pull some influences from like Les Claypool or something, but this feature here is just kind of a little bit too out there for my taste. I do think they do a good job of keeping everything grounded though, considering just how weird this song does get, especially with these very weird vocal samples, which are, I mean, they're kind of fun, but I can't really help but wonder what they were kind of trying to go for with this one. Yasiphobia is a really cool, really pretty track that has some great bass and guitar work that flows really nicely with White's lyrics, which almost feel like a bit of like a soul coughing track meets Rush, which is kind of a weird mashup, but I can't really think of any other comparisons. And there are a few parts that seem a little bit awkward when it comes to some of the change-ups, but it's definitely not an underwritten song. Into the Twilight throws me for a bit of a loop, because I'll be damned if this isn't the beat from Robot Rock by Daft Punk, and with the way that they're doing this fuzz-heavy electronica, I can't help but feel it's intentional. Regardless, it ends up being really cool. This is one of the more interesting songs on this album just due to the simplicity in its main beat. Like, it's really as if they're trying to get as much as they can out of as little as possible. Dusk is a little like 30-second interlude track that I feel barely really is worth including in the track listing. I mean, it really only feels like it would make sense to me if it was just like the intro to What's the Trick, the next song on the album, but to separate it doesn't really make any sense because it doesn't really add anything at all. And that song, What's the Trick, kind of feels like Taking Me Back, but like again. But it kind of delves a little bit more into that late 90s alternative like punk and metal sound with a vocal part that's kind of like a Rage Against the Machine meets Henry Rollins type sound. And I can't help but feel like this song would have made a little bit more sense on side A of the album, because this second half is just a little bit more calm, a little bit more pulled back than this track is, but it still works pretty well. That Was Then, This Is Now feels like a bit of a dip into 60s psychedelia with a very White Album style sound. I can't say that this song has a lot of staying power for me personally, but it does have some pretty cool effects layered into the track. I do find the writing to be a little bit tiring on this one though. It does feel like something that would have been like on Lazaretto or something, which I found to be a very hit and miss record. Next is a reprise of Yasiphobia, which is pretty cool, but it doesn't really seem like it was necessary to split the song in the first place. I mean, the two songs songs together would be around like 7 minutes long, which I guess is a little bit long for a Jack White song, but I don't really see why this second part is where it is in this track listing. Like, it's still pretty good, but yeah, I really would have preferred if they had just kind of kept this track whole instead of doing a reprisal that kind of just feels like a bit of an extended jam. Morning, Noon, and Night really hits a solid classic rock wave, channeling some very Led Zeppelin style vocal patterns with what I think is an organ part leading the song over top of a very repetitive, chuggy bass part. Of all of the tracks here, this one is kind of the slowest burn. It's cool to pick apart, but it doesn't really end up holding up all that well past a couple of listens. Final track, Shedding My Velvet, is the only track to really step back from this intense fuzz, heavy rock sound for a bit more of a funk and blues heavy style. To me, it ends up being one of the best offerings on the album and a really great album closer. I love the vocal work here from White, which is really well varied over some frankly hair-raising guitar work that I wouldn't call like complicated, but I would say it hits exactly how it's meant to come across. I mean, like, they're not getting into incredibly technical stuff here, but I do think that they just nailed the right notes. I just love how this track keeps things tight and focused. A really great finish to this album. So I think Fear of the Dawn really leans into a very marketable alternative rock sound from the beginning of the record all the way to the end, and at most points plays to Jack White's strengths, but unfortunately, though, this still leads to some moments where the point of some of these songs seems to be like chasing its own tail. So to me, this ends up being a very top-heavy album. Taking Me Back, Fear of the Dawn, The White Raven, and even Heidi Ho to an extent are really some of the best work here, with the rest of these songs, with the exception of like Into the Twilight and Shedding My Velvet, are kind of just technical pieces that have some really great production but end up being a little bit redundant in the grand scheme of things. Fear of the Dawn is a pretty decent 6. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of the album in the comments below, and if you liked this video, drop a like and remember to subscribe, and if you want to help the channel out further, check out my Instagram and my Reverb store. Links to those are in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.